Hello, this is Rick Manning, President of Americans for Limited Government here. We wanted to have a talk about the Virginia election. The Virginia election is upcoming. They're voting right now. Can vote, voting outside, your mail-in voting or in-person voting. You can do it up till the 30th, Saturday. And then you have November 2, traditional election day, to go out to the polls and vote as well. This election's pretty important. And so I've got with us our head of grassroots for Americans for Limited Government, Mark Lloyd. Mark has been working in Virginia since February 1 on this election, and really with a focus of educating and turning people out so we can have a pro-liberty constituency coming out to the polls and be heard. So this is something Mark has been living and breathing for the past 8 months or so. And I wanted him to be able to tell you a little bit about what's going on the ground, because so many people talk about election integrity, but they spend a lot of time talking. And through Mark and his efforts in Virginia, Americans for Limited Government has been doing something about it. And we really haven't talked much about it because, quite honestly, doing the hard work is more important than talking about the hard work. But now we're going to just give you a little view of what's going on, because I know a lot of people are concerned that they go out to the polls, what if the election's stolen? Well, we're trying to do everything we can to make sure that doesn't happen. Mark, give us a little brief preview on some of the things that we've been doing there in Virginia on the election integrity front, and start with what our focus point is in terms of districts and the like.
Okay, well, we came online in Virginia. Like I said, I stepped in. Virginia is my home, so it was easy to step into this. But we stepped in on February the 1st, and we set up an organization in Virginia called Virginians for America First. That is a project of Americans for Limited Government. And when we set that organization up, our focus was to take back the Virginia House of Delegates. Right now, the Democrats have a 5-seat majority, and it's terrible. We know what's happened in Virginia. We had to take that back. So that, again, when we kicked off, that was the start. We went live on our website just around the first part of March, and within hours after going live, we had over 500 volunteers, which that just doesn't happen. So we saw the intensity that is there. Months ago, the intensity was there. People were coming off of the November 2020 election and wondering what to do. And Virginians for America First gave them some place to hang their hat. So once we started talking to these volunteers, the number one by far issue was election integrity. So we set up an election integrity program. We reached out to other like-minded groups across the state. We put together a halfway decent coalition, better than anything's ever been put in Virginia before. And we reached out, found experts in elections, and we put together a program where we were able to train poll workers, poll watchers, across Virginia. Virginians for America First, this organization, actually, we've trained just north of 500 people as poll workers, poll watchers. And on top of that, that's important too, but there was a big interest in investigating, the problems that existed in 2020. And we had to tell folks, guys, go ahead, Rick, you're going to ask a question.
Yeah. And obviously, looking ahead, there's not a lot of, this isn't a rear view mirror situation. Absolutely. This is a forward-looking situation, because ultimately we want every vote to be counted, and we only want people who are actually eligible to vote to participate. And it's it's kind of a reasonable one person, one vote process that we're trying to help make certain that it is, in fact, the way the Virginia election is conducted.
You mean the way the founding fathers intended things to be, and they wrote
the way the Constitution says it should happen.
Yeah. So, but what we did is, when so many people were looking at 2020, and that was our message, is that, guys, 2020 happened already. There's plenty of people looking at that. We're learning some stuff that happened. We have to move forward into 2021. It's right on top of us. So we did. Again, training people to take part in the process of monitoring the elections. That was huge. But we also then began to look at what was coming at us. On July 1st, the Commonwealth of Virginia basically started stripping out fail-safes for the election process moving forward. They kind of destroyed it in 2020 as well, but on July the 1st, I mean, other things changed as well. So we got to looking at this and said, well, where are we vulnerable? So we went to work and we figured out that where the problem seemed to be was all the mail-in voting, the early voting. These things just all opened the doors up for fraud. So we had two programs that we launched. The first one was that we started to visit registrars across the state of Virginia, asking them what they thought about the new changes and what they thought about election integrity. And we got some interesting results that the registrars themselves were very unclear on the new directives from the state, that there were so many vagaries in interpretation that I would say that from county to county in Virginia, things were not being done the same way. We know that to be a problem. State Board of Elections, I assume, has tried to correct some of that, but there's no two places that are operating exactly the same. Go see for yourself. And the other thing was that the absentee ballots, and we partnered up with another group. It was a PAC, and they started to draw down the absentee ballot applications. That the state has the daily report that you can get by request if you're a candidate or a PAC or a party. So they started pulling these things down, and we pulled them down in our targeted districts because we're looking at 22 House districts that we feel like we had a shot to win. And those were the ones we were going to concentrate our limited resources in. So that's what we did. So looking at these absentee ballots that were drawn down, we found some strange things. The first batch that we pulled down had about 86,000. I want to say it was 86,000 and change of people that had applied, and we took those records and we actually ran them through a commercial database. And what we found is out of the first.
Okay, explain a commercial database. What is that?
Well, there's companies out there that if their job is to clean up these data files for mass mailing companies, things.
They want to make sure. Essentially, they want to make certain that if you're sending a piece of mail to John T. Smith, that John T. Smith is getting it and not somebody else.
That's right.
That's what they do.
That's right. So if John T. Smith lives at 123 Meadow Lane, we want to be able to verify that's where he lives. So that's what these companies are set up to do. They took the first 86,571 records and they ran that through. The first thing they ran it through was the NCOA, the National Change of Address, that's a U.S. government entity run by the U.S. Postal Service. And then they ran it through their commercial stuff. I mean, and I don't know what the mechanism is, where they use utility bills or something to track that.
Right.
But out of the first 86,571, they kicked back to us 5,541 records that indicated that the people that they said live there don't live there. So, that was like close to 6%.
So, well, yeah, that's about 7.5%. So they kicked back about 7.5% of the records saying, hey, these people have applied for absentee ballots.
Correct.
From a certain address. And yet our records, as best as we can tell, the people who applied don't actually live at those addresses. Now, in Virginia, is there a requirement that people live at the address that they vote from?
Yes, there is. I mean, there's certain things. If you're in the military and you're deployed, there's certain things like that. But I believe
But by and large, that's
by
the
and
rule.
large, if you apply for an absentee ballot at where you say you live, it's on your voter registration or what, that's where you're supposed to live. Now, if you live there and you're having your ballot sent to because you're on a job in Montana, that's fine. But where you say you live is where you're supposed, that's your residence, is where you're supposed to live. These people didn't live there. So what we decided to do is to verify that. So we actually put people in the field. We brought some folks in. We actually trained them to do a professional canvass, and they did. So we had multiple teams that went out, and they started knocking on these doors. And we had pulled a sample size. Remember, 5,500 and change was the original number. So we had a sample that we pulled some records in 10 of the 22 districts, 587 houses. These were the addresses. We said, okay, guys, go knock on these doors. Out of the 587 houses, we managed to have 243 live contacts where we actually talked to somebody at the house. And out of the 243, 217 of those people that had applied for absentee ballots, they put their name on that, requested it from the state. 217 out of the 243 did not live at that address.
So essentially what we found is that there was of the people first of all, they went through a massive computer check to see if people were there. People lived there. And then in the hand check, we essentially found that there was about 90%, a 90% accuracy in terms of the people not physically being there, have the people at the home having no idea who the person was.
Well, Rich, some of them had the idea. Well, they knew who they were, that they had lived there 4 years ago, or something. Yeah, we had one lady that said, "Oh yeah, they live in Canada now. They moved out 20 years ago, but they ordered an absentee ballot here."
Yeah, that's odd.
That's odd.
And so what remedy do we have? We've got this list. We know that a small percentage of them are definitely eligible. We don't want to disqualify people who are eligible. So what are we asking? What are we asking for registrar voters to do in this process?
Well, at this point, a few days before the election, there's not much that we can do, but we can move forward and realize that what we have found, and what's got to happen, is that we have to tighten up our our election laws.
Mark, my understanding was that some candidates are taking this data are actually asking registrar voters to take the list, pull the votes out from that list, turn them into provisional ballots so that they can be examined to determine whether or not the person was an eligible voter.
Right. What was done is that the list was disseminated to the candidates, and the candidates say they have the choice. They can challenge individual voters. It is going to be up to the candidates as to how they proceed. There is division of opinion amongst attorneys on how that works. But that's not something we can decide. They're going to have to decide. They're going to have to take
they're the stakeholders. They have to figure out what to do about it.
They're the ones that
but the request, just to be clear, the request though is not to just automatically disqualify these people. The request is to not mix their ballots in with the ones that are counted, because once a ballot gets separated from its envelope and gets counted, there's absolutely no way to know how that person voted. And hence you can say they're ineligible, but you don't know how they voted. So it's a moot point. Yep. But the whole provisional ballot system is designed to allow a registrar to pull ballots that are challenged and say, we're going to look at these individually. And in Virginia, if I'm not mistaken, they continue receiving absentee ballots 9 days after. I think it's 9 days after the actual election. Is that correct?
Yeah, they can receive those ballots after the election.
So there's plenty of time for them to look at those provisionals, do the background check, and the candidates taking our information can then say, actually do their own canvassing of these disputed ballots to determine to knock people out or not knock people out. So this isn't, if candidates choose to use this, this isn't just an academic exercise. This is actually a live fire exercise where there is an opportunity for candidates to actually get to the bottom of it and stop the counting and the integration of those ballots without verification that they are in fact eligible voters.
Well, that we have left that we, from my understanding, is that it's been left up to the candidates. We've told them to seek legal counsel as to how they proceed. That will be their decision again, because they are the ones that have standing.
Right.
That's just the way it is. Now,
well, but from a practical perspective, what we've done is we've provided those candidates with the information that they need to do with as they choose.
that is correct.
And so from a voter integrity standpoint, we're not calling balls and strikes. We don't know how these people voted. All we're doing is pointing out that these ballots look suspicious, and you might want to challenge them.
Well,
and a candidate who challenges them may find that there's more ballots that were for them than for the other guy. But
that's right. And what we found in the particular the House races that we were targeting, one of those in 2019 was one with a coin toss. There were a few of them that were single digit, margins of victory. So we've provided them with the information. They will need to take the next steps. They do. I guess there's different ways they can do it. I don't know what all those are. That's what we told people. You talk to your attorneys. But what we noticed though, Rick, is that when almost 6 out of every 100 of these ballots is questionable at best, that leaves a whole lot of room for fraudulent maneuvering.
And how many ballots did we find? How many absentee ballots total were there in districts at this point? Can you give us an estimate of what scale?
That's changing every day because we're in the process of doing.
We know how many, but are we talking about in a district 500 ballots? So we're talking 6 out of 500 means 330 people, or are we looking at 5,000 ballots, which means it's 300 people?
Well, I know when our last batch that we pulled of absentee ballots we were up to 142,000.
Okay.
So, you divide that amongst some of the districts. One of the districts in particular that we actually canvassed, they didn't hardly have any problems. Well, that district is like everybody that we knocked on the door. Well, they were there. It was legit. Where others, it was like it was one right after the other that was bad. So I can't necessarily give you a uniform number for all of them. They're all a little different. I will tell you that Prince William County, that really seemed to have some issues, as well as Newport News had some as well. Yeah. So go ahead.
Prince William County in particular, both Prince William County and Newport News. Prince William County on the congressional level is one of the representatives is a Democrat who won by a slender margin in 2018, who has been at least in the press complaining about the Pelosi agenda while voting for it, and now is real problems for 2022 and getting the system to actually deal with people who are on the voter registration rolls who are not eligible to vote is a big problem for her potentially. And so there's a lot of ramifications of this that go beyond the House of Delegates races. There's ramifications in terms of the national congressional delegation as well.
Well, we do intend, it is our intention that we're going to continue canvassing. By the end of this cycle, we're going to know what all the absentee ballots were. That will be reported to us. We're going to continue to work on the sample, continue to report what we find. So I don't know what, I mean, I don't know what the future really holds. I know what the past that we've been working on is pretty consistent at about that, it was 5.7%, almost 6% being a problem. I would say that, if a margin of error was 1%, maybe we can get away with it. You might not want to look at that too closely, but almost 6%, that's a big deal.
Well, and just to put this into perspective, we were only looking at the 22 districts.
Right.
We weren't looking statewide. So when you talk about 150,000 absentee ballots in 22 districts, you're talking about approximately 5,000 per district on average. Actually,
right. Well, do the math.
7,500 per district on average.
Yeah, you got 100 districts in the state.
Right, and so you're looking at but the ones that we've actually focused on, we're actually, if you have an average of even 5% fail rate with 7,500, you're looking at a solid 450 votes. And some of these elections were decided by a handful of votes.
Or a coin toss.
Or a coin toss. And so when you're talking 750 votes, that's an enormous number of votes.
It is an enormous number.
And it has a real impact. So while you might think 750 votes is, it's not that much, truth is 750 votes in 22 districts could be the margin of error, whether of who controls the House of Delegates.
That's right.
And so that's an important piece of this. And the reason I want to have this discussion is because doing this in advance, planning in advance to find out the problems, where the vulnerabilities were, and to go and test the vulnerabilities is not something you do 3 weeks before the election.
Nope.
This is you've been working on this since February 1.
Yes.
We've stood up a group in Virginia that could be a voice on this in Virginia. They are independent of ALG, but
project.
We're integrated in the sense that you're working for them full time to get this done, and I'm paying you. So that's so we have integrated. We've provided the staff and expertise to get this done, and while having locals be the ones who are actually driving it, which I think is a model that makes the most sense.
We were able to put together a true grassroots organization, and they just needed a little help. These are smart people. They're dedicated. And we were able to bring them together and give them what they needed. And now we have a functional, viable organization that's doing real work, real time, and looking to make an impact.
So now let's talk, so obviously on the voter integrity front, rather than complain about it after the fact, the candidates have a tool to go and do their work. And if they want to challenge, they can. If they don't want to challenge, they don't have to. If they want to challenge early, they can do it now. If they don't want to challenge until after the election, that it's their choice. We're not imposing that upon them, but the candidates now have the tool in their hands to be able to do what they think is the right thing, and based on their lawyers and everything else, and move forward. And that's and hopefully, from my point of view, do it before the election, because the last thing we need is to go through another election where we're after the fact trying to figure out who voted for who, with no ability to figure that out. And so we sit there, we can identify problems of 50,000 people voting from out of state in one state. But we don't really know what that means. And so you can't really make any conclusions on it because we don't know what that means. With this thing, by putting them as provisionals, the local voter registrars can do the work to get it right. Because ultimately, this is about making sure that one person, one vote principle is upheld. And that's a very simple thing. It's a basic freedom. And we've helped provide the tools for those candidates to be able to do that, something that they never would have been able to do otherwise. Some people ask the question, well, isn't this what the Republican Party is supposed to do? What's your...
the Republican Party... The Republican Party is supposed to have done a lot of things that over the years they just haven't done. Um, the party could have provided all that information that we just talked about to these candidates, but what it wound up being is that the group that actually provided we verified the findings at Virginians for America First. The Virginia First Action PAC is the one that actually provided that information to the verified information to the candidates. So, this was team effort, but the party, Rick, I can't even start to talk about what the party could have, would have, and should have done.
Well, it's my understanding that they, we were the ones who actually went in and petitioned to get access to the information related to absentee ballots.
That's correct.
And there weren't a lot of other people who tried to do that. So something as simple, given all the historical background, something as simple as having access to the basic information was something that we pursued, and virtually no one else did. And at least 3 weeks ago, when I last talked about it or talked to somebody about it, it was the one group that had pursued it and had access to it had never opened it. So it was so they hadn't bothered to even check it. So they checked the box of getting access, but then they checked the box of actually looking at it.
It's been an amazing experience just to as we move through this. Yes, we took action. We got with others that were willing to take action. I say the greatest disappointment in all this for me, as I look around at good people, organizations that have done good things in the past, the party, just the lack of inaction, things that it's like, guys, this is obvious. Why aren't you pursuing it?
Right.
I can't answer the why. They just didn't or won't. We did.
One of the great things is that I understand that you did have a pretty vibrant coalition of different groups in Virginia who were helping out. And so, we weren't solo actors under the umbrella of Virginians for America First. There were a lot of different groups that did help out. Are there any of those that you want to give a shout out to?
Yeah, I would say the Virginia Institute, they were a big help. Middle Resolution came across as they helped facilitate some trainings. I would say the Heritage Action folks, they helped out.
You accessed the Liberty students, the Liberty University.
Yeah, well, we wound up doing some other things, but yeah, there was some volunteers came out of Liberty University that did stuff. Well, there was so much going on. In the Liberty University they actually helped us in the beginning to pull together some of these different groups. The Liberty Standing for Freedom Center, they had access to other groups. They're a 501c3, so they're nonpartisan. And the whole point was we need to get people together to work on these issues that really are nonpartisan. So that was the spark that started really effectively pulling the coalition together.
And so the key to this is, it wasn't a matter of, it was trying to invite people who had resources, independent resources, to all put our shoulders to the wheel together to try to get this done. And by doing it through a group like that was stood up, Virginia for America First, it wasn't like they were doing it for, where Americans for Limited Government is in the lead and suddenly they're giving their resources to Americans for Limited Government. It got around a lot of those barriers that cause people not to work together fully.
It did
in this way. And I know you've worked very hard to put that together. Let's talk a little bit about the voter turnout aspect of this, because that's the part that is the other piece of this equation. And because the voter, we always in Virginia, obviously we're talking about this in 2021. Off-year elections have relatively low turnout. because they're unusual, they're unique. In Virginia, you got election every single year, and the state house elections tend to get a lot less attention than than maybe the congressional or the presidential elections. We do have a gubernatorial election, so that plays into turnout. But what are you finding in terms of, we've hit, first of all, how many doors have we hit and how many doors do we hope to hit
Well,
by election day?
We've still got deployments going out where we are canvassing. Our goal was 82,000 doors. I'm not sure we're going to hit quite 82,000. I'll know more on Monday when we get the final data in. But I've got volunteers in from the state of Tennessee. I got volunteers in from Tennessee.
That makes sense.
Got them in from North Carolina. Students for Life. I mean, we've got a number of people out there knocking doors for us. They're knocking in our house districts. And the canvas, there's several questions. I mean, obviously, we're trying to educate people on, America First principles, Virginians for America First. But in the canvas, we ask what your top 3 issues are. And several weeks ago, maybe 6 weeks ago, I would say that the top issue was critical race theory. I mean, that was, and then election integrity. Those were
these
right
were amongst, and these were amongst low propensity voters.
Voters that don't they vote for presidential elections. They're not typically politically engaged.
Right. So, and critical race theory is a pretty complicated thing for people who aren't engaged to have as their number one issue. That's pretty incredible.
Well, what we found out is that you take that conversation a little further. It's not just critical race theory. With all the garbage that's going on in Loudoun County, and believe me, that everybody,
people around the country,
they all know about that.
Loudoun County is in Virginia. It's a suburb it's an outer suburb of Washington, D.C.
Right, and the richest county in the country. But all the Virginians are watching what's going on there. Critical race theory was there, but then they have all the other stuff that's going on. And so now it's kind of looked like parental rights is where we're going with this. That a person actually that a parent has the right to go to the school board and make their voice heard, is what their children need to be taught. So parental rights, I think, is moved out
into. So 6 weeks ago we were at CRT.
Yeah.
Now you're hearing from people parental rights.
It's a parental rights
that didn't even exist 6 weeks ago.
Well, I think it just kind of morphed, right, because of all the stuff that's happened. But now the economy is moving up in there.
Wow.
Well, I mean, bare shelves, shortages, supply chains, and Christmas shopping. I mean,
inflation. Does inflation come into play?
That's right. Yeah, all of that economic stuff is really starting to be noticed. I do believe it's going to have a huge impact on this. And the interesting thing, these are low propensity voters. They're not hardcore Republicans, and they're feeling the pinch. They're waking up to what's going on, and they don't like it. And
to be clear, so people know, Virginia doesn't have party registration.
You don't register, yeah.
And so you can't sit there and say, I want to go talk to Republicans, or I want to talk to independents. You go out, you talk to low propensity voters who are in certain districts, certain areas where, where you think they're going to be most concerned about, freedom issues. And so that's kind of where you go to. But this isn't a situation where we're saying we're the GOP, we're going to turn out the Republicans. This is about talking to people who care about liberty and helping them get to a point where they say, I've got to vote. So my real question is, are these people voting?
Rick, the intensity that I'm seeing, maybe I'm too deep in the grass with it. But I'm seeing an intensity like I've never seen before. You start messing with people's kids, it ticks them off. It turns them out. And I think that's where we are. I really think that's where we are with this election. It's going to turn on that, in my opinion.
Well, and the interesting part is that the economy flipping back into the first position is interesting to me, because typically when that happens, you're in a high unemployment rate situation, and the problems end up being, who's to blame for the high unemployment rate? Well, unemployment is going down by most accounts, and so we're really in an inflation, bare shelves, supply chain, very complicated issues, but issues that people are saying, this is important to me, and there's a problem, and maybe the people who are in charge aren't doing that great of a job.
Yeah, I mean, the average guy on the street cannot explain the complexities. I think most of the experts can't explain the complexities.
That's true.
So
that's true.
But
they know there's something wrong. They see cargo ships not being unloaded, and ultimately, the reason Virginia is so important in this election is traditionally Virginia has been a bellwether related to what the country's attitudes about the incumbent president. And so the first year after the newly elected president gets in some cases, it's almost a 1 year milestone of how people think about the job that president's doing. And while Virginia has turned from red to purple to pretty darn blue in the last decade, the fact is, if this is we're focused on swing districts in the state. And if this is an indication of how those swing districts are, at least the low propensity voters of the swing districts are reacting, it doesn't look like it's going to be a really good election for Joe Biden.
Rick, I wish I could call it. It's going to be tight, but I see the intensity on the side of, I won't even say pro-Republican. I will say I see the intensity on the side of the anti-Joe Biden people. It's where it is.
So it's a let's go Brandon election.
It's a let's go Brandon moment. That's what this is.
It's that's understandable, and but it's something I don't think a lot of people are talking about, and ultimately, I think people need to appreciate that these kind of things. Are you running into GOP door knockers or anybody else knocking on doors?
Yeah, I mean, they are. A lot of these candidates, we've got a certain group of candidates that they're out there, they're working hard. They've got some great volunteers. They're out knocking on doors for their candidates. And most of the doors they're knocking, it's the hard R's, it's the hard Republicans. They want to turn out the base. Youngkin has brought in some people. The strike team
Youngkin is the Republican candidate for governor.
Youngkin is the Republican candidate. They've brought in there's a strike team that comes out of Texas they're coming in and knocking for him. And there's different groups.
That intrigues me, Mark. Let me just, I know we've got people from Tennessee and elsewhere who've come in to help, but the Youngkin campaign, which is a gubernatorial campaign, is dependent upon paid door knockers from Texas, is what you're telling me.
Well, I don't know that they're dependent. I know that those guys have come in. I am seeing some activity in these local Republican units, not all, but there's several where they do have people out doing door knocking. They're doing lip drop. So, I mean, honestly, Rick, I've been in Virginia politics for a long time.
Right.
I have not seen this level of activity in an off-year election ever before.
So there's a lot of intense activity, and the differentiator, and we set out from the beginning to have this be the differentiator because we've been involved in campaigns for a long time, and every candidate always wants to get your sure vote out. Okay. I know this group of people, the people who always vote, if they come out and vote, or the people who miss an election only occasionally, if they come out, I need them all to come out for me to win. And the person who votes occasionally or only in presidentials tend to become lowest priority in terms of hitting their doors, because you have less likelihood of having that door result in a vote. That's been the traditional model.
Yep.
And because we basically said, we're going to invert the pyramid. We're going to go and we're going to talk to people who are the low propensity voters, because ultimately the low propensity voters, when they come out, that shifts the entire playing field. If you think about it as a chessboard, essentially what you're doing is you're adding an extra queen on the chessboard, because you're taking voters who wouldn't have voted and you're bringing them into the polls, and 7 out of 10 are going to vote most likely for a Liberty candidate. And as a result, you're getting, for every 10 votes, you're picking up 4. You're netting 4 votes. And that's how you win elections. Is it's not just getting your own vote out, it's shifting the playing field. So you're getting out extra people, whether it's through voter registration or through get out the vote. And by getting out extra people, you're essentially shifting the playing field to being a pro Liberty playing field rather than maybe a toss-up playing field. Yeah, and it's something that we made a deliberate plan to do. We looked at the list, we figured it out, and hopefully the results will be that pro-Liberty candidates get elected.
And we're going after them, and we're getting a response. People aren't shooing us off of the doorstep. That does happen sometimes.
Well, that's an interesting thing, because most people who are relatively apolitical or sit there, they don't want you knocking on their door. You're getting a good reception from people. It's not just.
Of course, there's the other one. What are you selling? But no, we're not getting that. We tell them what we're doing, and we ask them what we're asking them, what their issues are, and then we match it up. Well, this guy, these guys are for your issues. So we've had pretty good response from people that don't normally get knocked on. Now, we'll say COVID may have made a difference. I had people telling me that, oh, no, nobody's going to answer your door during COVID. Well, that's exactly the opposite. You got some people that you knock on their door, they won't let you leave. They want to talk to you because they hadn't talked to anybody in a long time. So
that phenomenon still exists.
It does still exist.
Wow.
So it's just, I don't, it's there. The other thing, and I don't know, I can't gauge it, but I can tell you that although I don't have a lot of Democrats that talk to me usually, regularly, I've got a few that will talk to me sometimes. And I've had a couple of friends that they're Democrats, but, and they'll never vote for a Republican. Never. They're not going to vote for Terry McAuliffe.
The Democrat candidate for governor.
That's right. They're just going to, they may leave it blank. They may not go vote.
And that's that's one of the interesting things that obviously the governor's election is what most people are paying attention to. It's seen as the bellwether, but we made a deliberate decision to focus on the House of Delegates because, quite honestly, if you get the governorship and there are a Democrat majority in the House and a Democrat majority in the Senate, the governorship is okay. They can appoint a bunch of their friends, but you're not getting much else.
It's a lame duck walking in.
Everybody, Virginia only allows, for those watching, Virginia only allows governors to serve one term. So they have a very short window to get stuff done. And as you said, they're a lame duck walking in. But if the same party controls both the governorship and one house, there's a lot more leverage to be able to get things done. And there's value to that. Yep. So that's why we focused on that. And from a resource perspective, for those of you who've been supporting Americans for Limited Government financially, understand that this is where some of those resources have gone to do the voter integrity, to do the GOTV. And quite honestly, we budgeted for the 22 districts. We didn't budget for the whole state. And if we'd had the money, we would have expanded. But the fact of the matter is we didn't have the resources to do it. And rather than do the entire state poorly, we decided to do 22 districts well and do a great job in 22 districts and let the chips fall where they may elsewhere, rather than doing a crummy job in the rest for the entire state because the resources didn't exist. And VFAF has done a phenomenal job in terms of leading this. And so anybody who's interested in this and perhaps trying to do something in your state, this is something we're going to be evaluating after the election and see what went right, what went wrong, and what we might want to do. But feel free to let us know if that is something that you're interested in, and we'll take a look and try to figure out how we can get it done. But once again, I hate to say this, but it's about resources. It's about whether there's the dollars available to do this, because this is not inexpensive. It's not, from a campaign perspective, it's not that expensive, but it's a significant budget item at ALG. And so if it's something you like, it's something you want to do, we'll get you a full report on what happens after the election, because I think this is an example where we can show that vision and the willingness to just dig in and do a job and have an objective and just plot it out over a period of time really pays off. And I think we'll be able to show that. And I look forward, we'll be publishing a report on it at the Daily Torch sometime after the election, when we have the ability to do the analysis we want to do. So look for that. Mark, do you have any final words about what's going to happen on Tuesday?
The best way to overcome voter fraud is to turn out the vote. So if you haven't voted, go vote. Take your friends to vote. Get your friends to vote. Get them to the polls.
And if you happen to live outside of Virginia, which a majority of people are watching this, if you know anybody in Virginia who's like-minded, please call them up, send them an email. If they haven't, and just say, hey, have you voted? And if they say yes, ask them, well, have you hooked in to try to get other people out to vote? Have you contacted your 10 friends who are similarly minded to make certain they're voting? And because ultimately this is a word of mouth game, and the single most important person in any word of mouth game is somebody's friend or relative, because a candidate has a vested interest. Somebody knocking on the door can do what they can do, but the fact of the matter is, somebody who they respect or asking them to make certain they went out and voted, who's informed, can sit there and make a real difference in terms of just doing the margins. And in elections where literally handful of votes could make the difference between whether the Republicans are in control of the House of Delegates, Liberty candidates are in control of the House of Delegates, or non-Liberty candidates are in control of the House of Delegates, that phone call you make to a friend or relative could be the difference between that occurring. So every single vote counts. Make sure we turn people out, because ultimately we can't complain about anything else if we don't vote.
That's right.
So that, Mark, any final words?
That's it. Just thanks, everybody. Go vote.
We are going to